Hello, everybody. Welcome to this webinar presentation where we're highlighting the findings from the IDM Smart Document Processing Survey undertaken in 2021. Thank you for spending some time with us today. We've got a few people starting to come in now, so I'll just get done with the introductions and I'm sure people will join us as they are able to. For those of you I haven't had the chance to meet, I'm Bill Dawes, the Sydney-based publisher, editor and CEO at Information and Data Manager, the weekly email newsletter and magazine I hope you are currently subscribed to, and if not, please visit idm.net.au to sign up today. But before we get in today, I have a confession to make. Early last week, I booked a Christmas Eve function for my extended family. This includes my brother's families in Brisbane and Melbourne who were unable to come up for Christmas last year, or my son's wedding in October. I think it was exactly 24 hours after I made the booking that I read the first report about Omicron and the variant that threatens to send us back into lockdown. So I suspect I've single-handedly, through my audacious attempt to have a traditional family Christmas, caused the onset of the latest viral malady. Apologies to all, but here's hoping it doesn't send us back to square one. Anyway, that's enough of that. We're all sick of coronavirus. Let's get into the survey, and please let me know as we go through it any questions or comments you have or any difficulties you have with the vision or sound via the Zoom chat, so I can discuss this at the end or fix things if we have time. I'm sure you've all read IT news headlines today, which are full of confident predictions of the uptake of AI by business and government. Just last week, Gartner predicted that worldwide artificial intelligence software revenue will total over $60 billion in 2022, an increase of over 20% from 2021. They also reported almost half of CIOs in the 2022 Gartner CIO and Technology Executive Survey have already deployed or plan to deploy AI and machine learning technologies within the next 12 months. But they did also find a lag in maturity, caused by reluctance to embrace AI, lack of trust in AI, and difficulties delivering business value from AI. The idea behind this survey was to investigate the reality on the ground today with IDM's readership of around 7,000 in enterprise government information and records management in Australia and New Zealand. Thanks to my friends at Kodak Alaris for coming on board to sponsor the survey. The survey has highlighted an enormous opportunity that exists for vendors and solution providers that can ease the adoption of the technologies at the core of smart document processing. And just looking over there, good to see we've got a bunch of you online now. Okay, let's dive into the results. Who do we survey? This slide shows a breakdown of the respondents by industry. IDM has a strong penetration into the government marketplace in ANZ, which represents around one third of the overall readership. For this survey, over half of responses came from government, which is a bit higher than the actual reader representation, which could be due to a number of reasons. Firstly, there's a strong push to adopt AI solutions in government, but there's also a greater willingness on their part to share what they're doing with pesky journalists like me in the public sector, whereas the private sector is bound by confidentiality clauses and are less willing to share competitive advantage. Outside of government, you can see the other bars represent the traditional industries where document processing and workflow is critical. And who did we survey again? In this slide, you can see a breakdown by organisation size. This is again reflective of IDM's overall readership, which skews towards the enterprise level and large government agencies who are grappling with a lot of inputs. Over the half of the survey responses came from organisations with over 500 employees. And here is a little bit of a closer look at some of the job titles and industries of those who responded. I'll leave this up for a bit so you can have a quick scan over this to get a better idea of what the data and who it represents. There is a real diversity of roles, and I use that in the traditional sense of diversity, but all with a common thread, which involves knowing where information is, how it's being processed, and what happens to it afterwards. The old joke about records managers is that they get up each morning, put on their cardigans, and wonder how they can make your job much harder by forcing you to enter metadata every time you need to do something. If AI really does hold up to its promise, then perhaps that joke, they'll stop telling that joke in a few years. Interesting to see a few job titles that include the word transformation. What happens to a transformation manager when the transformation is finished? Is their job made redundant? Although maybe perhaps organisations are acknowledging that digital transformation really does never end. It's an internal ongoing process, like poor Sisyphus rolling the stone up the hill and watching it fall down again every time he gets to the top. So, okay, let's begin with the survey questions. And immediately we came up against the fundamental challenge, the fact that the paradigm of the document is still the dominant paradigm. Since the outbreak of COVID-19, a lot has been said of how the pandemic has accelerated the adoption of digital and contactless solutions by both corporate entities and consumers. But behind the scenes, organisations are still facing the traditional challenge of managing digital processing with essentially analog inputs. They're crying out for technology that helps eliminate the need to spend time on tedious, non-income producing tasks such as manual data entry and review, document collection and reporting. Just how much we'll see shortly. So question 2 saw over 3/4 admitting to have problems with onboarding content. This is quite a remarkable figure. It shows why the very heart of what is trendy in enterprise IT today is RPA and other kinds of automation to speed up mundane processes and reduce costs. The promise of end-to-end automation of document-centric business procedures is massive, particularly considering the amount of unstructured data is expected to grow exponentially in years to come. Despite the ongoing digital transformation, many organisations today still spend quite a bit of time manually processing information from countless documents. Platforms that bring more automation to the working environment and platforms that are empowering more people to get involved in building tools to help themselves work have seen a huge rise in usage in the last year and a half. How is that unstructured information presently captured? The number illustrated in black is the interesting one here. The fact that over 80% of those surveyed, and remember, these are large-scale organisations, these are not mum and pop shops, are still employing manual data entry. It's a surprisingly high result. It's apparent from these figures that even organisations with a deep penetration of scanning, whether centralised or distributed, are still required to undertake manual data entry. The poor purple bar, which is less than 10%, represents that tiny proportion who do not require any data capture at all, reinforcing the earlier slide. Given the big numbers that Gartner are predicting for AI uptake in 2022, and actually the numbers that they're reporting for sales in 2021, it's interesting to see the very small numbers against the 3 big names in that field today, Google, Amazon, and Azure. I would have certainly expected more. Okay, it's time to hear directly from one of those who took part in this survey. I'm going to intersperse between my findings and some of the comments from those who were surveyed. I'm always pleased when people in busy jobs make time to share their experiences, and our first interviewee was terrific as she gave a lengthy rundown of many of the technology and process challenges she faces in her job as a newly appointed information and records manager at a large metropolitan council. The following snippet is just a short section where she reflects on the potential impact of AI in her specific role. And as a side, one interesting aspect of AI is that artificial intelligence in movies and TV is pretty much always represented by females. Why is that? I wonder why. Perhaps because they're never wrong.
I've been in this sector for almost 30 years now, and I've never seen a government agency with such a low level of IM maturity. We have just been approached by eCloud because they are doing some product development work with Objective. So Objective gave them my name, and I knew eCloud anyway because they work with.
What have I done? Sorry,
Grey storage. Yep. And eCloud have offered to do an auto class test for us. So we give them a few sample documents and access to our NAR, and they show us how they can use artificial intelligence to automatically register the documents. And so we're looking to do that test, because if I can get the digital mailroom sorted, in my mind, the physical copies can then just go to OMail, they'll scan them in, the artificial intelligence will then pick up the keywords, the score, register it automatically into the EDRMS, will take that work away from my registration officers, and I can then elevate them onto higher duties and actually do some metadata cleansing and some digital archiving and digital preservation and other necessary stuff. As an archivist by trade, I'd love to see digital disposal run by the machine. and errors are then, errors then come up in the error list, and the human says, oh, this needs to go there, that's that, and then the machine obviously keeps on learning. I'd love to see that classification and sentencing happen using machine learning, natural language processing, that type of thing. There's a lot of queries about whether people would trust the machine. I mean, I've seen the eCloud operation at Cardinia. They've had it in place now for a few years, and it's an absolutely amazing operation. And they lead the way in local government landscape, like local government infrastructure in Victoria. They are the leading council. They're doing things, they've been way ahead of their game for years. But there's been a lot of skepticism, even just in my own team, like, oh, but if the machine does that, then I'm going to get through my work quicker and I'm going to lose my job. And it's just like, oh God, why do people have this thing? Why do they think that just because a machine is doing this, this, and this, that they're going to lose their job? It frees up the human to do the higher value stuff. So it's a bit of sometimes it's a bit of a hard sell, but I think we'll get there. There's growth in the digital space, and I know from industry colleagues, and I know from like working on the RIMPA groups and stuff, that there's so much going on. And the more I speak to different councils, there's not many people that actually have that inherent Office 365, I'm not talking about like a SharePoint administrator, because I think once you get your head around the mechanics of SharePoint, a monkey could administer it, but it's to actually use those additional tools. Not many councils that I've spoke to actually have that Office 365 specialist who understands that kind of data component that you can use it for. And so, one of the things is, like at my council, it's like, well, we've got SharePoint, we've got Teams, we've got a couple of people that do stuff with Azure, I do stuff with Azure, but it's still not marketed across the organisation as a really powerful tool. But then, to me, this is like Excel all over again. Excel came in the 1990s. People use it for spreadsheets and simple functions, but they don't realise the amount of data analysis and the amount of functionality that Excel has. Only those really advanced users. And I can see Azure going down the same path. It's going to need that systems expert to really capitalise on its functionality.
Right, definitely some interesting comments there that support the data in that previous slide showing the low uptake of Azure cognitive services, which is really AI on tap available for all of those M365 users out there in government today. One other interesting comments you made in the interview was that at most 2 people in the entire organisation were there that you could actually talk to about these topics. This underlines there is still a big challenge to communicate the potential of AI and smart technologies to high-level stakeholders.
I've been in this.
Oops. Okay. We also asked respondents to estimate the number of documents that need to be processed each month at their organisation. Some of their responses came from those who are processing a very, very high number. Well, most were at the lower end of the scale, although still significant volumes. Okay, now we get a more detailed look at how many organisations have actually implemented the technologies at the heart of automated document workflows, and how many have plans to do the same. The first thing is the very interesting numbers for OCR and the black bar at the top, which is of course a well understood technology. There's a neat fit between those who have implemented and are planning to implement OCR. Nearly 70% have done so and 30% are planning it. So everyone who doesn't have OCR is pretty much planning to implement it, which is good news for the Effisoft, Kofaxes and Abbeys of the world. But what this slide truly demonstrates is the glaring certainty that automated document classification is a huge near-term opportunity, as we heard from the Melbourne Council previously, that is about to get underway with a trial. Nearly half who responded said it's on their near-term agenda, but the number who have implemented was still surprisingly low. There is nowhere near the same momentum for other technologies or processes. RPA is probably the most hyped tech of the past 2 years, but the orange bar shows only around a quarter of those surveyed have implemented it. However, the chart on the right shows this will experience strong growth going forward as around a quarter in the planning stage. The purple bar shows there is still some skepticism out there about the business value of AI, as we highlighted earlier, with a small number with no adoption or plans to adopt. We now take a look at which areas of the business are planning to deploy smart technologies. AP is always top of the tree, but still does not up to 100%. So why the gap, which seems a bit odd? It's still, if you add up those who have implemented and those who are planning, you still end up with 30% of people at reasonably large size organizations who are happy to remain with manual data entry for invoices, which is interesting. Just below AP, we have pretty consistent results for other document intensive parts of the typical organisation, accounts receivable, POs, onboarding, etc. What's probably most surprising about this chart is the blue bar at the bottom, which indicates there are many that are not expecting change in any of the part of the business. And okay, time to check in with another interviewee who is battling with the familiar problems of legacy platforms and information silos. Another one of our records management professionals at a fairly large local government authority.
Okay, it's still basically legacy in that we do deal with paper on a daily basis. We probably have about 50 customer requests that come in mail on average each day. We digitise them straight away and drag them into the record keeping system. We do have our own corporate email box where it's not managed by me or my team anymore. It's looked after by what we call our integrated customer contact centre. So they're the face to the world. So the contact centre looks after the incoming emails, which they capture into Objective. We do have web forms that are actually captured and converted into emails and then come through the corporate system. Apart from that, yes, we still have something like 300 odd paper forms that we use for a variety of programs and services that we deliver. Well, that's the thing. If we go down the path of M365, then we can utilise the AI, or the machine learning. We use Kodak equipment for the actual document scanning. I suppose it's the old inherited silos that we have still, in that the usual, I suppose, management barriers where you might have buy-in by one group manager and not by another. And so it becomes problematic trying to deal, to try and find a consistent, I suppose, critical mass in some cases, because at the moment they perhaps are too busy to concentrate on something that may or not come to fruition. But robotics and automation is a new world totally altogether.
Okay, some frustration evident in there from our poor records management leader, but still a good deal of excitement about the potential for AI, if you can just get someone to convince his distracted management.
Okay.
Oh, there we go, I did that again. Okay, for our next question, we asked, what was the #1 barrier to adopting smart technology solutions for document processes? The legacy issue is on top, as it has been for about as long as IDM has been running surveys, which is quite some years now. Some familiar issues then follow: fear of change, lack of sponsorship, unable to establish ROI, and then we have the yellow bar, which provides a real opportunity there for solution providers to remove that challenge of dealing with multiple vendors and too many separate links in the change by, I guess, bringing all those disparate technologies and platforms together in something of a solution that can be implemented without grief. Okay, now we've moved up to our final question, which asks respondents to take a step back and assess which systems, processes and resources are priorities for their organisation over the next 12 months. This really does reinforce the huge opportunity once again that exists to help businesses and government organisations automate business processes. It was clearly the most voted response. Although the blue bar could indicate a bit of a chicken and the egg situation, which comes first, updating legacy systems or automating business processes. Unfortunately, you can't have one without the other. The low number who ticked other down the bottom makes me confident that we managed to cover most of their immediate priorities with our 8 options above. So it's a fairly clear indication there. And any organisation that can deal with all of those in 12 months is probably doing pretty well. Now it's time for our final interview to end the presentation, and this time we go up the food chain a bit to speak with a lady running information management for a very large Australian federal government department, one of the largest. I was very pleased that she was able to make some time for an off-the-record chat. I'll play that now. The promise of smart technology, whether it's AI or machine learning, is to be able to recreate what a human would have to do in terms of being intelligent enough to make a decision about a document. You do mention that you're planning to implement that. Where are the kind of areas that you see that being helpful?
We have a rich legacy of information on shared drives. So I can see that, if we can save some of the heartache of having to comb through mountains of information and, use some sort of AI to help work out where the value is and keep and look after that, that's going to save us a lot of time and heartache. Have you eliminated people putting data into that shared drive as far as from now on? Nope. Okay, that's good and honest. So we still have some business areas that persist, but we're working on it. And again, this is a MOG issue, a machinery of government issue, because we just have different organisations coming in and out of who we are at any time that, just when we feel like we've got them under control, a new problem pops up. Because some of the products that are out there are quite daunting, shall we say. Yeah. Or they're still very heavily dependent on migrating information into EDRMSs. And I think at this point in the game, we know by now that trying to migrate things back into Trim or Objective or whatever system people are using, it doesn't work. People aren't going to come on board with it, so we have to find a better way. So the decision's been made to see if Castle Point can live up to its claims.
AI and smart technologies basically involve smart people working with programming, creating algorithms, writing code, and is that the kind of facilities you have internally, or you would always look to external people to apply that?
We do actually have some amazing developers and people who work, on the building things on Dynamics 365 and Azure platform engineers and all sorts of things. But
oops, that was the end of that answer. But I think some interesting stuff there. And one of my favourite TV series at the moment is Succession, and one of the lead characters, Logan Roy, had a great quote in line in a recent episode. "Nothing is a line," he said. "Everything, everywhere is always moving, forever. Get used to it." For government departments having to cope with constant machinery of government changes, the comment is particularly true, but also for businesses dealing with the volatile and disruptive world of 2021 and beyond. For them, everything, everywhere is always moving. The promise. So here's some conclusions we can draw from the survey that we concluded today. It's still a challenge to demonstrate the value of these smart technologies. They're overcoming the legacy systems barrier is paramount. And there's definitely a need to prove the solution is not harder than the problem, to get buy-in and to get visibility within stakeholders within large organisations. And I'm quickly glancing over this chat box, and I can't see anything in there. So obviously I've kept you absolutely wrapped for the entire presentation, and you may need to digest the information provided today, but thanks for attending the webinar. I hope you found some helpful information that will prove useful. Please email the address on your screen if you have any questions regarding the survey and the presentation, and look forward to talking with you and communicating with you in the future. But finally, always keep this in mind: artificial intelligence is no match for natural stupidity. Goodbye for now. And just to illustrate the last quote, we'll now have that awkward moment at the end of the webinar where the host stares at the screen trying to figure out how to find the off button. There it is.